Cold weather survival training. 3 days in the mountains with the occasional below zero temps. 12 students, each one half a mile apart. We were given kind of a flare gun, in case you hit a "oh shit I'm gonna die" moment, and you were supposed to head to it if you saw one go off. Anyway, I'm in my shelter freezing my ass off, and I see a flare go off. My heart sank, and I grab my gear and rush there. As I'm getting closer, I see 3 more go off at different sites. And now I'm kinda panicking. 1 is bad. 4 is a shit show. I get within 100 feet of the first site, and see the other student's shelter. I warn him I'm approaching, and walk up to find him fine. Fire going and everything. I ask him if he fired a flare or saw the others. He said nothing and shows me his flares. None had been fired. I check him out. He looks fine. He still doesn't say anything, which is weird as fuck. I thought he might be in shock, so I stayed a while, until he pointed to the door. I take this as my cue and just say I'm gonna leave if he's all set, and he nods. I walk back toward my site and get this eerie feeling. The whole way, the hairs on the back of my neck are standing up. I start getting back into my shelter, and someone is in there. I tweak a little and think it must be another student, until he looks up and just stares, expressionless. It took me a second to realize that it was me, like looking into a mirror. I have never had a more terrible, scared, I should not be here feeling in my life. I bolted out of the shelter, tripped and fell. Next thing I know, I'm waking up in my shelter to someone asking if I'm okay and if I'm ready to hike out. I rationalized that everything that happened was probably a dream. I get up and get my stuff together. As we're walking to meet the others, he asks me why I didn't respond to the flares last night. This still weirds me out. I used to be on a search and rescue patrol. One night, we had a very strange call. A loud car crash in the middle of a rural area was reported by a nearby resident, but when emergency workers showed up, the victims were nowhere to be found. So, we showed up to the scene. At the end of a very long dirt road, there was a 90-degree turn with an embankment. The car was clearly going at a very high speed, missed the 90-degree turn, hit the embankment, flew through the air, and the front of the car hit the ground so hard that it gouged out a pretty sizable hole upon impact. The windshield showed 2 shattered impact zones where the passengers' heads hit, covered in blood and hair. There was more blood in and around the car. The scene was gruesome and didn't look like a survivable crash, especially given the mangled condition of the car. We expected to find bodies nearby. Police dogs, firefighters, and now an entire search and rescue party, and we still weren't able to locate the victims after several hours. As night set in, it began to get more and more eerie. There was this horrible looking car crash, but no bodies to be found. Finally, after about 3 hours of searching, there was a 911 call that came in. A report of a bloody dead body found in the bed of a parked pickup truck in a rural home's driveway a couple miles away. Apparently, a family was coming home from vacation, and when they pulled into their driveway, they noticed the body and immediately called 911. So, 2 police units dispatched from the search to respond to the call. We all assumed this would be the end of the story. Well, the police showed up to the house, and to everyone's surprise, no body to be found. Somehow, the body had vanished. There was blood, but no sign of anything else. So a second search radius started from that house. We searched practically the whole night. We were called back the next morning, and nobody ever found the bodies. We eventually called the search off. To this day, I have no idea what happened. I'm not the kind of person to have a great many friends, but those friends I do keep are sacred to me. So, one evening, I was getting out of the Rotterdam subway to go back to my apartment when I see an old friend who I hadn't seen in a few years heading into the subway. I call out his name. He turns, waves, and makes this "call me" gesture. Then the doors close and the subway rides off. 30 seconds later, my phone rings. It was my friend, who told me he just seen me in the train station. Apparently, I had grins, waved, gestured call me, and then the door shut and the train drove off. Like I said, I lived in Rotterdam. He lived in Enschede. That's just over 200 kilometers apart. Okay, so when my best friend and I were 15 years old, we were on our own little terrible 80s hard rock cover band. His dad's friend, who happened to be a virtuoso jazz guitarist, asked us if we'd ever seen this amazing, must-see guitar movie called Crossroads. We hadn't, but he played it up so much that we just had to go to Blockbuster that night and rent it. So, Crossroads is essentially given background by the true folklore story of Delta blues guitarist Robert Johnson, who sold his soul to the devil for incredible guitar ability. The legend goes that Johnson walked to a crossroad at midnight with his guitar and waited until the devil came. The devil can take any form he chooses and tends to take a form that would make most sense to the person he's interacting with. In this case, he's an older, well-dressed southern gentleman in a fancy new Ford. Anyway, the devil comes and inspects Johnson's guitar and tells him that he can show him a few new tunings that will help him with his guitar playing. Johnson hands the devil the guitar. The devil tunes it, hands it back, and the contract is done. Johnson's soul has been exchanged, and by sunrise, he will suddenly be able to play it with otherworldly ability. Okay, so, being 15-year-olds, and for lack of much else to do that summer, my friend and I decided to give this thing a try. After a little 14K dial-up research, we figured that any old crossroad would do, and as luck would have it, there are plenty of places where two roads crossed, just about anywhere. We each took an electric guitar, and at exactly midnight, strode out a few blocks away from his parents' house to see what happened. We stood there for upwards of half an hour, feeling a little foolish, but bolstered by the brave and bold thing we were doing. After growing bored, we began to debate whether or not to call it quits. We'd tried, and we'd failed. The devil wasn't going to really come and ask us for our souls. After all, that's just folklore. Suddenly, an unremarkable gray Toyota Camry, or Honda Civic, or Nissan Maxima, slowly rolled over to us and pulled to a stop. A youngish man in his mid to late 20s with spiked hair and glasses rolled down the window and leaned across the passenger seat toward our direction. At first, we weren't sure what to believe. There were lots of reasons for a car to pull over and inspect two teenagers standing on a street corner at midnight holding electric guitars, some more sinister than the rest. However, this was 1999 or so, and things like that just seemed more commonplace than they do now. "Hey," he said, "I like what you guys are doing out here. Cool guitars. That's really cool. You guys are just hanging out here with electric guitars?" We looked at each other. "Yeah," my friend said eventually. "Just hanging out. Bored. Nothing to do." "You know," he began, looking directly at me, the resident guitar player in our two-man band. "That's a nice guitar. You should let me take a look at it. I bet I could fix it up for you, show you a few things that might help." I swallowed hard, mind frozen, unsure how I'd come to enter paths where the veil between reality and unreality had become so thin. I knew what he'd say before the words left his mouth. "There are some new tunings I know about." We stared at the man in utter disbelief. This couldn't be happening. I froze. Finally, my friend, always the most demonstrative of the two of us, spoke up. Nope, we're good. We gotta go." Before we left, the man told us that he lived just down the block and indicated a row of nearby houses. He told us to come by if we'd ever had a change of heart. We ran home, incredulous to the events that had just taken place. We ran back over the event with each other repeatedly to ensure that we hadn't accidentally sold our souls to the devil. I remember thinking how upset my grandmother would be with me if she'd known that I went out seeking to make a deal with the devil. A few days later, composure regained via our usual irreverent juvenile senses of humor. We'd mostly gotten over the event. We decided that if this guy really did live on that block in one of those nearby houses, we should go investigate. So we did. We took a walk, guitarless this time, down to the group of 3 or 4 houses the man had vaguely indicated with a swipe of his hands on the aforementioned night. As we approached the general destination, I began to hear faint music that grew louder as we approached. Using the music as a guide, we located the house that was the source of the sound and sat down on the cool grass separating the sidewalk from the street. Looking at my laid-up Casio watch, the revelation wasn't lost on me that it was just after midnight. As we listened closer, we were surprised, although maybe not as surprised as we should have been, to hear that the music wasn't coming from a stereo system, but it was live, the rehearsal of a band. And possibly, as we continued listening, the rehearsing band played a near identical set list of the songs that we ourselves would practice in my friend's basement, literally less than a quarter mile away. The quality of this band's practice, however, was incredible, especially since we'd spent some time searching and knew of no local musicians in the area, especially so incredibly close by. We deemed that location the Devil's House and tried to go back a few more times, but never heard the music again. We never saw the man in the nondescript foreign sedan again, and never attempted another deal. 18 years later, we still tell the story of the night we met the devil to incredulous friends who never seem to believe us. I promise that this story is 100% true, and we spent plenty of time considering that maybe the guy in the car had seen Crossroads himself recently and was just pulling an incredibly effective prank on us. If so, his follow-through was excellent, as after that one night, we never again heard or saw of him, his band, and never encountered anyone that could vouch for the fact that he even existed. By that point, we were far too scared to do any more digging, and just decided it best to let it be.